My granddad was cremated and buried to the song Burning Ring of Fire. Depending on what culture you're from, that's either hilarious or quite terribly shocking. Humour, as we all know, is a coping mechanism, but it's also a universal archetype appearing in myths and folk tales around the world and throughout time. It clearly is an archetype that has something to teach us and that represents part of our own basic psychology. Humour exposes illusion. It's the cosmic black hole between love and despair. It holds duality in the only way we know how. It stands for unpredictability, it dissipates dogma, and it helps us, if desperately, to create balance. Humour is an eternal, universal truth. Though we don't always agree on what is funny, we do agree that things can be funny. Biologically, it doesn't make much immediate sense. Like, what's the point in laughing at arbitrary slapstick and events until we ache and hurt and lose control? The clue to its evolutionary purpose is hidden in the even odder fact that humour is actually inseparable from pain, the trickster archetype. The trickster archetype represents humour, but it's also often the protagonist or harbinger of death, deceit, delusion. In mythologies and cosmologies, it's the epitome of the inescapable duality of life. In ancient Greek, we have Pan, the mischievous god of the wilderness, depicted as a shape-shifting faun, jolly in the tricks that he always pulled. In Norse mythology, we have Loki, a cunning, shape-shifting trickster. Then in Nigerian mythology, we have Ishu, a prank-playing messenger between the gods and the humans. Brazilian folklore, we have Sat, or Sachi, definitely butchered that name, a folklore boy riding hurricanes and playing tricks in the night, promising you anything you wish for should you catch him, but of course you never will, because it's the trickster archetype, he's like the wind. Native American folklore, we have Coyote, who appears in many different forms in many different folktales across all of the unique indigenous American cultures. He's often a dynamic figure appearing in shifting forms for different reasons. Common themes across these forms of the coyote are both benevolence and malevolence to humans. He's the destroyer and the creator, and is always feared in some way, always revered in some way. Then there's the Hopi, the Pueblo clowns of the Hopi. These are actually real people, kind of similar to medieval jesters, court jesters. So they are actually real people who take on the identity of the clown through body paint and masks that give them anonymity. And that's really interesting because, as we'll see later, the mask allows the clown or the trickster or the comedian to make social commentary or make taboo social commentary without facing the retributions that would normally come from that. So it's kind of like a barrier between, the clown and the jester has to take themselves out of society in order to comment on it in a humorous way. Pueblo clowns are a great example of general clown society, which is found across pretty much a lot of cultures. And anthropologists believe that clowns and clown society function for their ability to comment on what is wrong with the ordinary and how to do the ordinary wrong. In this way, clowns and clown society are a universal functional order. So they bring order by commenting on what is wrong and what is hilarious about doing the right things wrong. So they make people do the right things. They can also serve to disperse ego, because we know that in society and culture, ego can be a very dangerous thing if it builds up. The trickster archetype goes beyond just simple humour. Trickster stories are often darkly humorous stories designed to make us laugh, but they are also inextricable from the art of tragedy, which is designed to make us hurt. And if we think about the art of tragedy as well, it's represented by those masks, the masks of duality, which is a really interesting weaving with the archetype of humour. So the trickster isn't funny by default. The trickster isn't default funny archetype. Rather, it represents intellect, secrecy, and breaking boundaries, which we find funny at sometimes. It has a synonym with humour because it's breaking the boundaries. This sly, mysterious intellect is interestingly what we find humorous and how comedians make jokes. So most of these cultural trickster stories feature death, illusion, trickery, deceit, and the pain and Stories often remind us that life is absolutely not what we think it is, and that there's nothing we can do about that. We will always be prey to illusion. Is this the purpose of humour? Existential angst? Not completely. There is a much more obvious fact of why we enjoy humour, but illusion is certainly at the core. The nature of the trickster archetype is duality. The wise fool, the depressed comedian, the beloved shapeshifter, all the culture in question is personification of illusion. So the trickster archetype is literally us making sense of illusion. How else do we make sense of the times that we're wrong about something we so thought we were right about? Or the times that we saw a full picture from a new angle and realised we'd only ever seen half and we were wrong most of the time. And all of the times we realised we have less control over life than we ever thought. Tricksters, clowns, comedians, they all help us to make sense of life's inevitable illusion. They kind of help us to organise chaos. The trickster archetype often wears a mask. So, like the court jester, humour is unpredictable. Unpredictability is anonymous, like the wind. It has to remain anonymous, otherwise it's predictable again. Depending on the situation, the mask may also allow the joker to comment objectively on taboo subjects without facing repercussions, because they are no longer part of the society they're commenting on. Of course, people know the jester's true identity. It's not that people don't know who the clown is. It's not that people don't know who the court jester is. It's not that people don't know who the Pueblo clowns are. They know their true identity. It's just that under a mask, the actor seems to slip into a not-society, like a lawless free land. It's like a shamanic kind of ritual. Why is this funny then? Why are the dark, uncontrollable, unknowable forces of life so humorous? One most commonly accepted theory suggests that humour is a release of tension. And viscerally it makes sense, right? We know the belly laughs, the shaky muscles, the scrunched up face, repeated expulsion of air. It's a release of tension. We feel a strong emotion, this is how our body gets rid of it. And where does this tension come from then? This theory of where the tension actually comes from has evolved over the centuries according to our understanding of human biology and the human condition. In 1709, Lord Shaftesbury explained his relief theory that laughter is a pressure release from pent-up animal spirits in the nervous system. So at this period in time, in England or in Europe, we used to believe that in the nervous system lived animal spirits, and that is what gave us emotions. So pent-up animal spirits in the nervous system was what caused laughter. It's like an expulsion of these spirits. Then in 1911, biology had evolved, it changed, but the idea was the same. So a scientist called Spencer suggested that laughter was a releasing of just nervous energy, like a sigh of relief. It's just no longer a spirit, but it's just energy. Then Freud continued this train of thought by referring to laughter as an expression of repressed emotions that we daren't express in any other way, such as the belief against a certain taboo. If we go back a century again to the 18th century, we see that there's another kind of polar idea of humour, that it was an expression of incongruity. So it's a release of something that's jarred our minds. It's a release of something unexpected, which isn't far from the strategies that professional comedians use to make jokes today. Any comedian will tell you that a good joke comes from the unexpected, and this is why dark humour can be so funny and yet so unacceptable. It takes a free thinker to embrace this kind of boundary-treading humour. Then we have the philosopher Immanuel Kant, who proposed that humour was satisfactory. It provided a cathartic gap between what was supposed to happen and what did, resemblant of the often disappointing and somewhat anticlimactic experience of life itself. So again, this is just us and our psychology making sense of just the roller coaster that life is. Like, we expect something and then it just doesn't happen, and we make sense of that with humour. So today we have built up the idea that humour is to wit as sleep is to life. It's a relief, it's a rest, and a break between the knowns. All in all of these theories have morphed, and all of them point to the basic underlying truth. That humour helps us to cope with the tension between polarity. Soren Kierkegaard said that humour is the last stage of existential awareness before faith. So this is kind of a religious understanding of humour. He meant that the person with a religious view of life is likely to cultivate humour. He even says that Christianity is the most humorous view of life in the world. And he's not saying that religion is a joke. He's actually just commenting on humour being a form of faith, a form of knowing life, a deep philosophical awareness. And if we think about the wisest people that we know, Buddha is a great example. The most enlightened people of our species are always quite light-hearted, light-heartedness and humour seems to be a character trait of the enlightened, a character trait of the wise and the old. Not always, but it seems to be joined. It's interesting, though it's obviously not objective. It speaks to this idea of humour being a medium to explore ultimate truth. Ted Cohen in 1999 quoted that engaging in humour can foster a tolerance for ambiguity and diversity and promote creative problem solving. Ironically, as well as humour being a religious experience, it also transcends dogma. It allows us to think outside the box. In fact, in the case of satire, it actively tears down dogma. Ever true to its illusory, unpredictable nature, humour both comments on truth and helps us to transcend binary thinking. Some of the ancient Greeks understood this dynamic well. They ritualized comedy inside of the art of tragedy. Aristotle said that the tragic and the comic are the same insofar as they are both based on contradiction, but the tragic is the suffering contradiction, the comical, the painless contradiction. Not all ancient Greeks shared the same sentiment, however. Plato and Plato-era philosophers considered laughing a possessive, negatively passionate force that reflected loss of self-control. The Stoics spoke poorly of humour, including Descartes, I never know how to say that. They felt you could never have humour that wasn't at the expense of another person's life. Humour was a misery to them. If you allow yourself to follow that kind of depressing vein, there's something saving in the idea that humour just isn't good for us, that it somehow weakens our control over ourselves, brings us too close to destroying structures. There are some cultures that allow the expression of humour more so than other cultures. For example, the Japanese are stereotyped for their puckered seriousness. Of course, stereotypes are never representative of complete truth. In one study, there were 4 times as many occurrences of humour in random English dialogue as there were in Japanese. In the English dialogue that they studied, 30% of these humorous occurrences happened in formal conversation, like colleagues and with your boss. In Japanese, 0% of these where they appeared, humorous encounters were formal. Humour in the Japanese conversation was entirely reserved for casual, close conversation. This might be to do with collectivist ideals, like reservation of the individual, and a slight taboo around expressing risque emotion. Wordplay is much safer and much more relatable, which is why the type of humour in Japan is different from European humour. The Japanese humour leans into an art form with playing with words, double entendres, homonyms, this kind of thing. It might be the affinity of Eastern animist cultures to believe that words have a sort of spirit within them. In the same study, they found that American humour is more individualistic. Americans are not so embarrassed by their emotions, and their humour was found to be majoritatively open. They often directly laugh at themselves or other people. The jokes definitely carried a more individualistic focus. English humour, they found, tended to be based on rhetoric and wit and innuendo. Canadian humour showed to be a hybrid of English and American style, expressed as typically satirical, with comments on superiority and social structure. European humour tended toward taboo and slightly existentialist jokes, possibly reminiscent of the Enlightenment and Renaissance era, where dark existential philosophy merged with street humour. Interestingly, Chinese culture seemed to be split. People tended to devalue humour if they followed Confucian philosophy, but view it as harmonic if they follow Taoist philosophy. Humour is a universal truth with a million tiny disagreements. The trickster archetype does well to express this illusory nature of humour, straddling good and evil and every other opposition in between. My personal view on humour is that I think it's very wise. I think laughter really is the best medicine, and that we should all venture to be a little bit darker with our jokes, if not to just make a comment on the craziness of life, precisely because darkness is so serious, and what else are we to do with that seriousness? Just like my grandpa's funeral song choice, I think the deeply tragic moments of our lives can be understood and integrated better when we are able to take a meta, unattached view of them through humour. You're not laughing at the awfulness or laughing despite of the awfulness, although sometimes that does help. Rather, you are laughing because of the awfulness, because it hurts and it's begging to be felt, because it means something that you can't quite understand, because a smile transcends seriousness every time, and because it's just quite unbelievable that we're here experiencing any of this chaos anyway. And I think humour is the highest form of understanding life, higher, in my personal opinion, than religion. And the ability to make humour over something means that we've attained an important enough distance from it to see the nuances and biases for what they are. If we can't joke about it a little, in my view, we're dangerously close to believing it as utter truth. There isn't any utter truth. I think that's why people get haughty, I guess, why they don't like to make jokes about sensitive matters or sensitive situations. Might be because they're sensitive to it falling apart, that they really need it to be seriously true, and for no one to try and take it apart. And I think we'd all do quite well to draw closer to the trickster archetype, though we will never understand it, but we can learn about his shapes through mythology and tarot and other social commentary. And I'll leave you with a quote from Bill Cosby. Through humour, you can soften some of the worst blows that life delivers. And once you find laughter, no matter how painful your situation might be, you can survive it.